My name is Veronica Augustin. I'm a professor here in Material Science and Engineering. Welcome to our seminar series. So I wanted to give an introduction to the introduction today because we have it's kind of a special seminar today. About a couple of years ago, the department opened up an opportunity for a research group, the postdocs and students in the group, to nominate seminar speakers to the department to actually allow the students and the postdocs to have a choice of who is brought in. And our research group was one of the ones that participated in this, and the group has chosen Professor Pomerantseva to be here. And so as a result, the introduction this morning will be given by Mike Spencer from our group. And again, it's a pretty special honor to have a student or a researcher selected seminar speaker with us this morning. So without further ado, here's Mike.
Yeah, so first of all, I recommend if this opportunity comes up, it's a fun experience to get to organize a seminar speaker coming in. We got to also go out to dinner last night, and that was quite enjoyable. So today we have Dr. Ekaterina Pomerantseva, and she has a BS, MS, and PhD in solid state chemistry and material science from Moscow State University. And in the midst of doing all that, she also got a master's degree in biochemistry at McGill University. And then she went on to do postdoctoral fellowships at University of Waterloo with Linda Nazar, as well as at University of Maryland with Dr. Reza Gutsi. And then she joined Drexel University as an assistant professor in 2013 and is now an associate professor as well. So her research interests are in solid state chemistry and of materials for energy storage, conversion, and desalination. And she has awards such as the NSF Faculty Early Career Award, Drexel's Outstanding Early Career Research Award. She's a Sloan Fellow, Stein Fellow, and Erasmus Mundus Materials for Energy Storage and Conversion Program Scholar. And she's been involved in outreach opportunities, which includes some participation in the Philly Materials Day, which is something I attended when I was in high school, which is pretty cool. And she's served as an editor and associate editor for different journals. So with that, please welcome our speaker.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so flattered that I was selected by students and postdocs, and this makes my visit so more exciting. Although, yes, attending regular seminars is also quite prestigious. And knowing some interests in this department, today I wanted to focus my presentation on the synthesis approach that we developed in my group, Materials Electrochemistry Group at Drexel University, which we call chemical pre-intercalation synthesis. And I want to show you how by chemically pre-intercalating different species, we can modify the interlayer region of the layered oxide materials and also go beyond that interlayer modification and prepare some nanocomposites and also two-dimensional heterostructures. So, and first of all, Philly Materials Day is not the only fun activity that we do at Drexel. We actually have a very active electrochemical student chapter. And I was this chapter mentor for several years, and we did such fun things as playing a game which we called the electrochemistry feud. It's actually very similar to the family feud game, but all the questions that were used to play it were about different aspects of electrochemistry. For example, when we asked about 100 researchers in the United States, what is your most favorite electrochemical testing techniques, the most popular answer was cycling voltammetry. So, and all other questions were similar. So my group, Materials Electrochemistry Group, is focusing on developing synthesis approaches in order to synthesize materials with the targeted structure, chemical composition, and morphology. So we essentially want to answer the question, how can you make this type of material? And the example here shows different structures that we prepared, being one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional materials. And we utilize these materials in various electrochemical applications, such as energy storage, electrochemical water desalination. And lately, we started doing more of pair function distribution analysis in order to better understand the structure of our materials that we synthesize, because in many cases, these are metastable phases that don't show the long-range order. So the standard treatment refinement approaches do not work for these classes of materials. So today I'll be focusing mostly on this top part of the slide, where I'll show you this synthesis method that we developed, and also show you how by varying these different synthesis steps, we can control or tune the charge storage properties of the synthesized materials. And this schematic really simplifies what we are trying to do in my group. So we want to have a control over where to place specific atoms in the crystal structure of the material in order to have a given layer structure, given interlayer distance, and given chemistry of the interlayer region. So I actually just published, it's 2023, a review paper in the accounts of chemical research that summarizes all our up-to-date results. And if you're interested, please go back and read this paper. But today, I also want to show you some new directions that are not the part of this article, because these are the next step that we are taking in utilizing the synthesis method for preparation of the functional material. So I know that many people in this audience are familiar with the language that is being used in energy storage. But for those who might be working in other areas, I kind of want to remind some terms that are essential for the understanding of the rest of my presentation. And one very important word that I want everyone to understand today is intercalation. So intercalation is basically a type of a chemical reaction that involves two players. First, it's a host material with a given structure. And then there are guest species. In case of energy storage devices, these are most commonly inorganic ions. So what's happening in the course of this intercalation reaction is that guest species are being inserted into the crystal structure of the host material without any major modification of the structure of the host. For example, if our host is a layered material, when we intercalate certain species, the layered structure doesn't transform into anything else. The only thing that can be changing is this interlayer distance. And this reaction is essentially the basis of the modern batteries, lithium-ion batteries that I'm sure everyone uses every day to power cell phones or laptops and so on and so forth. So in this case, lithium ions intercalate into the structure of the anode and cathode material. And this occurs without structural transformation. This is why because this intercalation reaction is very reversible, that's why batteries have this excellent property of being rechargeable. So we can take them, we can insert them in and take them out without any drastic changes. And that's what results in ability to use battery for many, many cycles. So, but this is done electrochemically in the battery. So what we do, we intercalate ions in the course of the material synthesis. That's why we call this process chemical pre-intercalation, which implies that we do insert different ions into the interlayer region of our materials, and we can change the interlayer distance, but at the same time, we do it prior to electrochemical cycling. Then we use this chemically pre-intercalated materials in order to study the energy storage properties in the electrochemical intercalation reaction. And in addition to lithium-ion batteries, currently there is a lot of interest in developing beyond lithium-ion energy storage devices that utilize more abundant ions, such as sodium, potassium, magnesium. But these ions, they bring certain challenges because, for example, sodium and potassium, they're much larger than lithium, although they do still hold single charge. But for example, magnesium and aluminum, while being small, they have either double or triple charge on them, which also results in certain diffusion limitations and other challenges involved into utilizing these ions as charge carriers in batteries. So what we want to do, we want to develop a material that would favor not only reversible lithium-ion intercalation, but also beyond lithium-ion cycling. And the material that attracted our attention for this purpose is this bilayered vanadium oxide. This is a very interesting phase because the layers in this structure are built by two vanadium rows, and that's why they're called bilayers. But more importantly, the interlayer distance in this parent phase is about 11.5 angstrom. This is a huge distance, and such a large interlayer region cannot be stabilized by van der Waals interactions only. In order to stabilize this large interlayer distance, we need some other species. We need some other forces that would hold these layers apart without collapse. And in the parent bilayered vanadium oxide, such interlayer species that help with structural stability are just water molecules. So water molecules reside in the interlayer region, essentially introducing some hydrogen bonding within the layer. And this helps with maintaining structural stability with such large interlayer distance. So, and yesterday at the dinner with Veronica's students, we talked about the existence of many different types of layered oxides, which are attractive for application in energy storage technologies. And they can be used as cathodes because oxides show high potentials of ion intercalation, so they're good for the cathodes application in batteries. But at the same time, when we go back to the lithium-ion battery schematic, we can see that in standard energy storage technology, all lithium is incorporated into the cathode structure. For example, in case of lithium cobalt oxide or lithium manganese oxide. So initially, all lithium is in the structure of the cathode, and the first thing that battery manufacturers recommend is to charge your battery first, because we need to put lithium into the structure of graphite that is used as an anode, and then we can use the battery to power our devices, okay? So, but all these oxides that we discussed yesterday, and also this bilayered vanadium oxide, they don't have lithium ions in their chemical composition. So when I started as an assistant professor at Drexel University, my first idea was, how can we convert this material into another material that would already have lithium ions in it, so it would remind lithium or cobalt oxide more, and we can just incorporate it into the energy storage technology. And that what led to the idea of developing chemical pre-intercalation. So we wanted to develop a method in which we would synthesize exactly the same material, but with lithium ions being already incorporated into this interlayer region. And thanks to very rich work done by Jacques Livage on salt gel processes for the synthesis of transition metal oxides, I knew that with certain precursors, the transition metal oxides could be dissolved to form a solution using hydrogen peroxide in aqueous environment. So essentially, I'm going to be using this vanadium oxide system as an example to explain the synthesis. Alpha V2O5, which is also a layered vanadium oxide material, but with much smaller interlayer distance, is used as a precursor. It's dispersed in water, and hydrogen peroxide is added. What happens is a sequence of hydrolysis and condensation reactions. First, these complexes between vanadium, oxygen, and hydrogen, tetrahedral complexes, undergo nucleophilic attack by water molecules and convert into octahedra. And then these octahedra grow together, forming these chains. And then the chains also grow together, forming bilayers. So our idea was very simple. Why don't we do the same, but in the presence of the specific cations, like lithium cations, during this solution stage of the synthesis? So these red spheres in the schematic essentially indicate these different types of cations that are being incorporated into this solution during synthesis process. and cations are positively charged, and these vanadium oxide bilayers are negatively charged. So through simple electrostatic interactions, the cations get trapped in the interlayer region of the growing bilayered vanadium oxide. So, and that's was the idea which worked really well. But before I show you the result, I just wanted to mention that this is a very simple synthesis. So it's just a beaker on a hot plate, and you see like a student adding some precursor into the mixture of water and hydrogen peroxide. You see some bubbles. This is due to the peroxide decomposition. And essentially the color changes indicates the sequence of these hydrolysis and condensation reactions that occur in the system. And the product is just a substance looking like this, which sometimes my students call raspberry jam. So my research has a lot of analogies with cooking, because we also add salt into our synthesis. For example, sodium chloride, at some point we just use the one bought in the supermarket, and it worked. So, however, after this step, we can also use this raspberry jam for the post-synthesis treatment, and this can include either hydrothermal treatment or annealing at elevated temperatures. So, and that gives us another degree of control of the structure and chemical composition of the final product material. So, and here is what we have synthesized utilizing different inorganic ions: lithium, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And with alpha V2O5 precursor, all materials have one-dimensional nanobelt morphology. We noticed that the interlayer distance in the products really depends on the nature of the chemically pre-intercalated ion. So moreover, we realized that the interlayer distance increases with the increase of the hydrated ion radius. And that implies that the ions are being pre-intercalated, not in their simply ionic form, but in their hydrated form. And the chemical pre-intercalation of ions is accompanied by pre-intercalation of water molecules. So, and this ability to make these materials from the point of view of energy storage allows us to investigate two distinct directions. First, we can chemically pre-intercalate electrochemically active ions, the same ions that are being cycled in the battery. An example is sodium ions in case of sodium-ion batteries. And in this case, ions create, during synthesis, ions already create sites that are favorable for this types of ions. So we hypothesize that we can improve diffusion through this material synthesis. On the other hand, we can chemically pre-intercalate electrochemically inactive ions, for example, magnesium ions in case of lithium-ion batteries. And in this case, chemically pre-intercalated ions essentially serve as pillars that stabilize the layered structure further through the ionic bonding between the ion and the vanadium oxygen layers. So in this case, we expect to see much improved electrochemical stability during cycling. And this method has been explored by other groups. For example, Esther Takeuchi used magnesium pre-intercalation to show that they see improved performance in magnesium-ion batteries. My postdoctoral advisor, Professor Linda Nazer, they used it in zinc ion cells, chemically pre-intercalated zinc, and showed that the material demonstrated improved performance as an electrode in zinc ion cells. And we selected potassium to show the same thing. So we chemically pre-intercalated potassium ions and cycled the resulting material in potassium ion cells. And what we observed is very high capacities for potassium, because this is a heavy and large ion, so usually its diffusion is hindered. But with chemical pre-intercalation, we see a very nice capacity values, and also not bad rate performance, meaning that the material can withstand relatively high currents without losing much in its performance. So it's confirms our suggestion that this synthesis leads to advances in case of even beyond lithium-ion batteries. So that these results triggered us to investigate the mechanism of charge storage. So what we've done, we synthesized lithium, sodium, and potassium pre-intercalated bilayered vanadium oxides and cycled them in lithium-ion, sodium-ion, and potassium-ion batteries. And from the shape of the CV curves, one can see right away that the mechanism of charge storage is different in case of these three systems. And by analyzing cyclic voltammograms at different sweep rates, we calculated that in case of potassium, we see the highest contribution of diffusion limited charge storage, while in case of lithium, the highest component comes from the non-diffusion limited contribution. And this can be really explained when one looks at the interlayer distance and the size of chemically pre-intercalated ions. In case of potassium, it's the smallest interlayer distance and the largest ions, which implies that diffusion will be more critical in case of these materials. And for lithium, it's vice versa, small ion and the largest interlayer spacing. So diffusion is not of such an issue in this case. So another aspect of the chemical composition of these materials is water. Because in my group, we study the electrochemistry in non-aqueous systems. And many of you probably know that water is bad for non-aqueous batteries. So it causes lots of various parasitic processes that occur in the battery during cycling and essentially kills the battery. So, and the group of Louis Piper, who I just learned moved from United States to Europe, they've shown that in case of using the parent bilayered vanadium oxide with water molecules only as an electrode in lithium-ion batteries, they observed the poorly reversible formation of lithium hydroxide in the interlayer region, which due to this poor reversibility led to the significant capacity decay. So I'm using this example just to show you one of the mechanisms why water might be bad. And in case of our materials, we already know that all ions get pre-intercalated together with water shell. So is there a way to minimize this interlayer water content? So we've learned that through simple low temperature vacuum annealing, we can minimize this water content without phase transformation by annealing our materials at temperatures. The highest that we could use is 260 C under vacuum. So, and while this performance kind of still not good, I promise to show you better electrochemistry today. What we found is that by annealing these materials at higher temperatures, we do see improvements. And what this tells us as a scientific community is that when we think about different electrode materials, we must realize that as we start studying new phases, we may need to revisit the electrode processing approaches. Like, for example, the standard drying temperature for the electrodes in non-aqueous energy storage devices is 105 Celsius, just in order to remove surface water. Now we have structural water, so this drying temperature might not be sufficient, and we might need to increase the temperature of electrode drying in order to see better results during battery cycling process. All right, so the second direction with chemically pre-intercalated ions is stabilization. And again, this has been explored by other groups. Liang Mai chemically pre-intercalated iron into bilayered vanadium oxide, and Stefano Passerini used manganese and nickel. And in both cases, they showed improved electrochemical stability when they cycled these chemically pre-intercalated materials compared to the pristine bilayered vanadium oxide that contained water only. And we already had 5 materials that we synthesized, so naturally we just cycled all of them in lithium-ion batteries. And in this case, lithium pre-intercalated phase is more of a reference, but remember, we observe improved diffusion in this case when the chemically pre-intercalated ions and the electrochemically cycled ions are the same. So what we found through the cycle life and replicability experiments is that the magnesium pre-intercalated phase, shown in blue on these graphs and also blue in here, gives us the best performance. It shows the best rate capability, it shows the best cycling stability. And this is also the phase that has the largest interlayer distance in our synthesis. So we concluded that for the cycling of small lithium ions, increasing interlayer distance might lead to the favorable performance, not only from the point of view of capacity, but also electrochemical stability. So, but the question is, can we improve the performance of these materials further? Because even for magnesium pre-intercalated V2O5, there is still some obvious capacity decay after 50 cycles. So this is still not so good for a battery, right? For the real battery that one wants to use to power a smartphone. So with this kind of goal to improve the electrochemistry further, we started looking into the alternative precursors in our synthesis. And some of you might know that in my department, I have great colleagues, Professor Yuri Gogotse and Professor Michel Barzon, who in 2011 discovered a new family of two-dimensional materials called MAXenes. And these are essentially layered transition metal carbides, nitrides, and carbonitrides. But what's important for us is that these MAXenes, they can be chemically very versatile, so they can serve as chemically rich precursors for the synthesis of other classes of the materials. And also the morphology of these particles is two-dimensional, and it's at nanoscale, which implies that we can see some increased reaction kinetics when we transform this MAXenes into, in our case, oxides. We just want to oxidize them. And again, we are not the first ones to do that. For example, there was a report where titanium carbide was used as a precursor to make layered titanium oxides. And also Professor Al-Sharif showed that the vanadium carbide can be integrated with some organic ligands in order to make metal organic framework. But before us, no one used vanadium carbide to make an oxide material. So what we've done, the synthesis is just the same. Again, we use hydrogen peroxide in the presence of metal chlorides, but the reaction actually occurs much faster than in case of alpha V2O5 precursor. And here we use vanadium carbide, V2C, as a precursor. And what's also interesting is that this is not the actual photograph, but the color of the solution in case of the synthesis with MAXenes is green. So it's already different compared to the alpha V2O5 synthesis. And another change that we were able to achieve is that we were able to decrease the hydrothermal treatment temperature, which is 220 in case of alpha V2O5 precursor. And in case of MAXenes, we only needed 140 C to convert the vanadium carbide into the bilayered vanadium oxide. So we analyzed all the products. So again, the XRD patterns tells us that the interlayer spacing changes depending on the nature of chemically pre-intercalated ion. Through the thermogravimetric analysis, we determined the hydration degree on all these phases, and we've learned that magnesium pre-intercalated phase is the most hydrated, and potassium pre-intercalated phase is least hydrated, which again is kind of an agreement with the water shell around these ions. But Raman spectroscopy showed us that there are no carbon bands in Raman spectra, which essentially implied that all carbon that was originally in the chemical composition of MAXene phase precursor, it's disappeared. So carbon evolves from our system in the form of some volatile compounds, but we haven't analyzed what those compounds are. But what's most interesting, I tried to emphasize on my previous slides that in case of alpha V2O5 precursors, the morphology of all the products was one-dimensional. We synthesized nanobelts. Here, the morphology of MAXene-derived bilayered vanadium oxide is drastically different. We see two-dimensional plates. So in case of lithium, these two-dimensional plates essentially form sort of a porous layer without agglomeration. But in case of sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, these two-dimensional plates grow together, forming flower-like morphologies. Again, so in case of sodium and potassium, the petals in these flowers are flat, straight. And in case of magnesium and calcium, the petals of the flowers have some curvature and have more intricate patterns. So the nature of the chemically pre-intercalated ion affects not only the chemical composition and structure of the synthesized materials, but also the morphology. And interestingly, through the electrochemical cycling, we've selected only lithium and magnesium pre-intercalated phases for cycling in lithium-ion cells, because those are the two materials that showed best performance in case of alpha V2O5 derived bilayered vanadium oxides. One thing that we noticed is that the CV curves, the shape of CV curves looks very different, which again implies that the charge storage mechanism in case of lithium pre-intercalated and magnesium pre-intercalated ions is different. But more interestingly, the electrochemical stability that we achieved for the MXene-derived chemically pre-intercalated bilayered vanadium oxides is still the best in the literature. So no one else was able to show such excellent electrochemical stability for this class of the materials. So that was a very exciting result. And from there, we just, now this is unpublished work, I promised to show you something new. We are now moving into the direction of utilizing solid solution MXenes as precursors. In this case, we used niobium vanadium solid solution, and through the basically the X-ray diffraction, we realized that the compositions with more mixed ions, closer to 1-to-1 ratio, can be etched much more easily. And also when we converted this solid solution MXenes into oxides using the same protocol as we utilized before, but in this work without chemically pre-intercalated ions, we synthesized bilayered vanadium oxide and amorphous niobium 205 for the end members that had only one transition metal, but in all the intermediate compositions essentially contain some fraction of bilayered vanadium oxide and niobium oxide. However, through electrochemical cycling, we noticed that again, the shape of the CV curve that corresponds to the low concentration of niobium and high concentration of vanadium looks very different from the bilayered vanadium oxide, while the XRD pattern shows almost only bilayered vanadium oxide in this case, which implies that we were able to achieve some doping of niobium into vanadium sites. And this is the direction that we want to explore further, because niobium doped bilayered vanadium oxide has never been synthesized before. And we are hoping that with this MXene solid solution MXene precursors, we can achieve that and modify the electrochemistry of the final product in a way no one was able to show before. And one last thing I wanted to show you on this topic is that just out of curiosity, we compared the electrochemical performance of the solid solution MXene derived oxide with the 1-to-1 niobium to vanadium ratio with the physical mixture of the materials prepared again through the vanadium carbide and niobium carbide transformation into oxides. And we see that the MXene derived composite shows much better stability compared to the physical mixture, which to me says that there is some advantages in forming heterointerface. And when solid solution precursor is used, the heterointerface between vanadium oxide and niobium oxide nanoparticles can stabilize the structure of the final composite much better compared to just simply physically mixing the two materials. So we are also exploring this role of the heterointerface further. So now I hope everyone remembers. So the best results so far we have achieved with the magnesium pre-intercalated bilayered vanadium oxide that had the largest interlayer region. So naturally, we wanted to expand the interlayer spacing of the bilayered vanadium oxide further. And in order to do that, we selected linear organic molecules of different lengths with the amine groups, which kind of introduce the positive charge, which is needed in order for this organic molecules to be incorporated into the interlayer region during material synthesis. And what we found that we used the low concentration of these three different organic molecules with different lengths shown here. We synthesized the product with the same interlayer distance. So we believe that when the concentration of organic molecules is small, they reside parallel to the vanadium oxide layers occupying this interlayer region. And as we increase the concentration of organic molecules, they might reorienting themselves and expanding the interlayer region. So now at high concentration of organic molecules, we see the correlation between the length and interlayer distance in the final product. And we got the material with the interlayer distance of 30 angstrom, which we didn't believe for a very long time until students from Professor Tahiri group have taken some TM images for us and confirmed that indeed we have a material with such huge interlayer spacing. However, what's interesting is that we expected to now see huge capacities because, like, look, we have such large interlayer spacings, but no, just the geometrical factor is not sufficient to achieve high capacities in case of battery reactions, because we also need the transition metal ion to reduce, and the number of transition metal ions is fixed. So in fact, the organic molecules, they occupy a lot of space, and they prevent ions from being intercalated in large amount. And that leads to the capacities that are essentially lower than those we achieved in case of magnesium pre-intercalated material. So the take-home message here is that just expansion of the interlayer region will not result in a material with very high capacity. There are other factors that need to be taken into account. So, and the last part well, actually, I don't think I'll be able to show you everything, but the next topic that I wanted to present today is formation of the heterointerface. So two-dimensional heterostructures are very well known in the thin film growth technology, and some advances of heterointerface have been already shown. However, the methods that are used in thin film growth area are not applicable for energy storage, because we need to have a lot of material. We need to synthesize material with very high yield in order to be able to use it as a battery electrode. Therefore, we need to develop alternative synthesis approaches in order to enable heterointerface in the structure. So, but what is heterointerface? There are different definitions, but we define it as the interface between the layers of two dissimilar materials. So simply by sticking layers of dissimilar materials on top of each other, we can achieve some interfaces where one material is facing the other one, and that's what we call a two-dimensional heterointerface. In case of layered oxides that are good for the cathode application in batteries, one of the challenges is the low electronic conductivity. There are only a few layered oxide materials that show reasonably high electronic conductivity, but most of them this could be a limiting factor in the performance. Wouldn't it be nice if we synthesized the layered oxide material where now and then we would introduce a conductive layer, such as, for example, graphene or MXene, which are highly conductive materials. So in this case, the electrons would go through this conductive layer, and ions would still have interlayer spacings available for them for intercalation. So, but how such structures can be synthesized? Because this synthesis implies a very precise control of the stacking of the layers. So we approach this through, again, chemical pre-intercalation through the basically bottom-up approaches where we would utilize carbon precursors and oxide precursors, combining them together, hoping that at the end we would have a heterointerface. And examples of such materials have been already demonstrated before. So what kind of molecule would be a good precursor for carbon? We learned that dopamine, that many of you know as a molecule of everything, right? This is a motivation molecule that is being produced in our brain, usually when we achieve something, when we feel good about our achievement. But the same molecule is also a great precursor for carbon synthesis. And for us, this molecule is attractive because it also has positively charged amine group. So it can react with our negatively charged vanadium oxide layers. And it already has this aromatic ring, which essentially forms a unit block for the carbon structure formation. So through this exactly the same synthesis process, we were able to chemically pre-intercalate these dopamine molecules into the structure of bilayered vanadium oxide. And remember, we cannot use high temperature, so we cannot anneal the sample at 400 C because the bilayered structure will transform into something else. So we are limited by temperature. We just for fun tried hydrothermal treatment, and we found that yes, we see some carbon bands in Raman spectra of the product, which tells us that some carbonization occurred even during the hydrothermal treatment process. Of course, this is not the graphitic carbon. This is something very amorphous, but still we thought it would be worth investigating electrochemical charge storage properties of this product. But before that, we also looked at the STM imaging of this material, and we noticed that within a single particle, there are some regions where in the interlayer region, we see additional material forming. So we interpreted this as formation of carbon layer. So now let's compare electrochemistry. On top, you have the reference material, which is just bilayered vanadium oxide. And at the bottom, it's what I call carbon pre-intercalated or material with oxide carbon heterointerface. The change in capacity retention is drastic. So the material, this heterointerface shows much improved stability, but even more exciting, you look how better the rate capability is. So the drop when we increase current density is much, much smaller compared to the pristine bilayered vanadium oxide electrode. And this basically tells us that the charge transfer processes are improved, and we attribute it to the formation of the carbon layer in the interlayer region of bilayered vanadium oxide. So with this method, we were able to achieve that. But like I mentioned, with imaging, we only saw little areas, small areas where we could observe this carbon layer. So our next step was in trying to increase the dopamine content during synthesis in order to increase the amount of the carbon precursor in order to have continuous layers of carbon in the final product. But what we've learned is as we increase the concentration of dopamine in the synthesis, apparently it also starts playing a role as a reducing agent. And in addition to serving as a carbon precursor, it reduces vanadium oxide. And instead of our favorable V2O5 phase, we now make the vanadium dioxide and even vanadium oxide with the vanadium in the oxidation state of 3. And while all these materials showed fine performance and could be studied further, this is beyond our interest. So we just decided to leave it at that, publish this result, showed that dopamine reduces transition metal ion during the synthesis. And we wanted to utilize an alternative approach in order to make this heterointerface. So bottom-up approach didn't work, so we decided to switch to top-down approach. And again, this is a very common method where two dissimilar materials are exfoliated to form the suspensions of two-dimensional nanoflakes. And then they get mixed, and various processing approaches such as spin coating, spray coating, or simple vacuum filtration can be used to create a heterostructure film. Again, this has been shown, for example, in this case for manganese oxide and titanium carbide nanoflakes. But the issue is that no one has ever exfoliated bilayered vanadium oxide. So again, inspired by the work on Maxine's, by our laboratory neighbors and Professor Gosse's group, we just use simple ultrasonication and powder of the lithium pre-intercalated bilayered vanadium oxide. And to our surprise, when we filtered the obtained suspension, we got the freestanding film with very different color compared to the precursor. So precursor is reddish brownish, and the film that was produced simply after sonication is shiny black. So the scanning transmission electron microscopy characterization done by Dr. Michael Zachman at Oak Ridge National Laboratory showed us that depending on the solvent that we use during sonication process, the structure of the final freestanding film is very different. When we used NMP as a solvent, the film had a lot of porosity. All the layers have some curvature and some pores forming between the nanoflakes. But when we used water, see, these layers are much more straight, and they essentially, the nanoflakes cannot be distinguished in this case. So it's a very different structure. So by using different solvents in the sonication process, we can control the structure of the final film. So we did look at the electrochemical behavior of the film obtained in water. And again, just like in case of the low temperature vacuum annealing, we found that increasing the drying temperature to 200 Celsius, we see improvements in electrochemistry. Of course, this is not where we want to be, but this is not the last step, because we don't want to study just the exfoliated bilayered vanadium oxide. We want to make a heterostructure. And another exciting recent discovery that we made is that when exfoliated bilayered vanadium oxide is mixed, in this case, with graphene oxide nanoflakes in water, we make a much more abundant heterointerface when we use cation-driven assembly. So essentially what we do in this case, and this is shown just for the bilayered vanadium oxide, just because the color of the suspensions changes and gets much darker, doesn't allow to see much when we add graphene oxide. So hopefully you can see, so this droplets, this is 10 molar lithium chloride that's being added, and you see the flocculation right away. So again, by introducing this positive charge from lithium ions, it results in agglomeration of the bilayered vanadium oxide nanoflakes, and that leads to the formation of these agglomerates, and then they can be filtered and form a freestanding film. And these are how these suspensions look like when we use the different amount of graphene oxide to make these heterostructures. So this is, of course, doesn't tell us much about heterointerface, because this is the cross-sectional FCM microscopy with the elemental mapping, but we do see some layers of carbon and some layers of vanadium that tell us that at least some heterostructuring does occur. We just sent these samples to Michael, so we are hoping to see a better resolved chemical analysis of these materials. And look at the electrochemistry. Now, for the material that has 28% and 35% of graphene oxide, the electrochemical stability and also rate capability is much, much better. So this tells us that, yes, this formation of the two-dimensional heterointerface definitely has very positive effects on the electrochemistry of the final structure, because the CV curves still look like the CV curves of bilayered vanadium oxide. So oxide redox activity is there, but the stability is much, much better. So now we work on developing this further to better understand the fabrication process, and we want to minimize the amount of graphene oxide. And that requires us to exfoliate bilayered vanadium oxide better, maybe use other solvents, and there are multiple parameters that can be changed. But to me, this is a very exciting result, because it does show that bilayered vanadium oxide can be stabilized through the two-dimensional heterointerface formation. And to prove you that, I also show you again comparison with materials that were with the electrodes that were obtained by physically mixing graphene oxide and bilayer vanadium oxide nanoflakes, and the difference is drastic. So see here the capacity drops to 0, while in this case we still have some capacity at the relatively high current density of 200 milliamps per gram. So I think this is a very exciting result that definitely needs to be developed further. And in addition to that, we of course also want to integrate our bilayer vanadium oxide with MXenes, because MXenes exfoliation processes are already very well developed. These are highly conductive materials, which unlike graphene, can introduce some redox activity into the final product. And that might allow us to also obtain much higher capacities compared to the two-dimensional heterostructures we've made with the graphene oxide. So I hope today I was able to show you guys that chemical pre-intercalation synthesis approach is very powerful to control this interlayer regions of the oxide materials. And in addition to that, can be used to modify the charge storage properties of these materials when they're used as electrodes in batteries. So we were able to make one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional particles, and also two-dimensional heterostructures. And I think that this is just the beginning of the journey. I do believe that this method has a lot of potential for showing advances in not only energy storage, but beyond energy storage applications that also rely on electrochemical intercalation of ions, such as electrochromics, sensing, and so on and so forth. And I would be also very excited to show that these methods work not only for bilayered vanadium oxide, but for many other transition metal oxides that are being explored for these types of the applications. So I also wanted to show you a few beautiful images. You probably heard about the nanoorthography competition, which is held by the Drexel alumni, now Professor Babak Anasori, at every MRS meeting. So students can actually get some cash prizes by participating and winning in this competition. And I also wanted to mention that my two-dimensional heterostructure work was selected for the Future of the Batteries exhibit in Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. I was very proud about that. And with that, I want to thank the funding agencies that supported all my work. Of course, my group, lots of the results that I presented today were achieved by my former group members, but now it's Leo and Tim and Saira who work on continuing development of this chemical pre-intercalation synthesis approach. And thank you so much again for your invitation, for your attention. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Awesome. So first of all, here's a little token of appreciation from the department.
Thank you so much.
Until we figure out how to make batteries last forever, that might help out. So
I know what it is.
What's inside.
The battery charger, and this is right related to the topic of my talk. Thank you so much for such a nice gift.
So does anyone have any questions?
Excellent talk. Really enjoyed it. So you did mention some work that showed that lithium hydroxide is a common parasitic aggregate that reduces capacity over time. Have you looked into the degradation mechanisms for all the different pre-intercalated cations and see if it's like a similar mechanism or how they create it?
I was trying to emphasize that lithium hydroxide formation and accumulation is only one of the mechanisms of the vanadium oxide degradation. In our work, we rely on all previous research done in this area because vanadium oxides have been of interest for battery applications for many, many years. If you might know the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Stanley Whittingham, believes that the next generation cathode material will be based on the vanadium oxide chemistry. And therefore, the mechanisms that are known for this class of materials are dissolution of vanadium oxide in the electrolyte, phase transformations, and also in case of hydrated phases, it's believed that at least some amounts of this water might be extracted from the structure of the material, and it can oxidize electrolyte. And furthermore, if these water molecules are transported to the anode side, in case of metallic anodes, they oxidize the anode surface, forming non-conductive oxides and hydroxides on the surface of the anode, which also results in battery performance degradation. We don't study these mechanisms in our work, but we rely on the work that has been already published on this subject. And through electrochemical evaluation of our materials, we develop methods that can suppress all these parasitic reactions and lead to improved electrochemical stability.
Great talk, thank you so much. So early on, you talk about how cations can serve as pillars in your layered materials. Can you talk a little about the mechanism by which they pillar? Are they bound to the layer, or is it more not kinetically activating that cation in the electrochemistry?
This is a great question, and I don't have an answer.
Okay.
So the challenge is that the questions that you are asking are would be best answered in collaboration with computational scientists. But the challenge is that the structures of this chemically pre-intercalated bilayered vanadium oxides are not known. So what I show you in most of these images is a hypothetical structure that is based on our understanding of how the oxide layers are built, but we do not know for sure where the ions are located in this interlayer region, where the water molecules are located in this region. And actually, I tried to initiate some collaboration with computational scientists, but they tell me, give me a CIF file, then I'll have something to start with. Without a CIF file, they're very limited in kind of trying to answer the questions that you ask. So that's why we now work on this PDF refinement in order to answer exactly these questions, where exactly these ions are and where are the water molecules are. So we just started working on that, but hopefully by the end of this project, we'll have some answers.
Let's take is it a quick question?
Yeah, quick question.
All right, sure, we'll take it.
Show that you use dopamine, but how would other amines affect that there are some more carbon like serotonin?
Exactly. And this is something that I keep asking my students, do we identify the whole library of organic molecules that also have positively charged amine groups, but more developed carbon-like pattern? Serotonin, melanin, I believe, rhodamine, all those molecules, they have a more like better defined pattern. But for some reason, students tell me that it's more challenging than dopamine. And I don't know why, because from the chemistry point of view, it's a pretty straightforward modification of the synthesis. Maybe I just need a good chemist in my lab in order to attempt the synthesis and see what the results will be. But I had the same thought as you do, that kind of incorporating a molecule with already better defined unit blocks for carbon would be attractive to achieve more continuous layers of carbon in the interlayer region. Yeah.
Thank our speaker one more time. Very nice talk.
Thank you.
I actually have questions because I've been working with, I didn't mention them last night, but I've been working with amine intercalated tungsten oxides. And for those, we don't see any intercalation at all. It completely blocks any insertion. how do I synthesize them?
Yes.
Ours is all a solution approach. It can be either an exchange or a just like dissolution and reprecipitation reaction of the pillar material.
And it doesn't intercalate?